Chapter 11 Visions in the Night. Ephesus and Patmos around the year 90. Introducing the Book of Revelation. Few books capture the imagination like the Book of Revelation. Countless apocalyptic stories are based on the idea of a dramatic end to the world or our civilization. Many occult stories have sprung from its descriptions of angels, devils, and demonic beasts. The Battle of Armageddon against the armies of Gog and Magog inspired Tolkien in his Battle of Middle-earth, and the fundamentalists of Islamic State their struggle in Iraq and Syria. It is the ultimate hero's tale, spanning the parallel universes of the cosmos and eternity. It doesn't get any bigger than this. The Book of Revelation has repeatedly fueled the paranoia and militancy of individuals, doomsday cults, and revolutionaries who long for their version of a 1,000-year utopia on Earth. What all these groups have in common is that they puzzled over the text until the prophecy specifically applied to their time. The most important theological commentaries on this book are therefore about its interpretation. It is obvious to read the book through such a lens. But was such precision also what motivated the writer? And what impact did it have on its listeners when this book was first read aloud in the Church of Asia around the year 90? The impact I experienced myself was very different when I listened instead of reading. I found a quiet spot by the stream behind our house. I sat down and listened to the spoken version on the My Bible app for over an hour. The big advantage is that you can't think or calculate. You listen more with your heart than with your mind. As you listen intently, you see the images tumbling over each other. You need your quote-unquote eyes to listen to this book. That's quite heavy because they are nightmares, full of revenge and violence. You feel the pain and trauma of John, of the Jewish people, and of Jesus' followers. You feel his anger towards Rome, which he calls the, quote, whore on the 7 hills, unquote, who lives in luxury from the misery she inflicts on others. But every now and then the sunlight breaks through, every time the Lamb appears, and eventually the light floods you in the final vision, moving, comforting, and encouraging. Is that what John wanted to give his brothers and sisters? An experience? You can try it for yourself if you first put yourself in their situation, in their traumas, in their relationship with the scriptures, and in their role of Jesus in their lives. John? After the terrible war between Rome and the Jews, in the year 66 until 73 of the first century, many Jews ended up as refugees or slaves in the province of Asia around the city of Ephesus. One of them, a man named John, is presented as the author of the wonderful book of Revelation that concludes the New Testament, although it was not written last. In the early church, there was a long debate about whether Revelation was authoritative enough to be included in the New Testament. Was the author the same as the apostle or not? How do you explain the differences in language and theology with the Gospel according to John? And is this book, which speaks of a 1,000-year kingdom of peace, really a prophetic vision of the future, the crazy illusion, or an artistic creation? These discussions have never really stopped. Today, most biblical scholars believe that the language and theology of the Revelation of John differ so much from the Gospel of John that they point to different authors, although there are remarkable similarities in the use of key words that indicate contact. It is also generally accepted that the author spoke Greek as a second language and still thought primarily in Hebrew and Aramaic. Moreover, many, and certainly those who compare this work with other prophetic revelations from the 1st and 2nd centuries, are impressed by the composition and imagination of this work. Letters to the 7 churches. John begins with 7 letters to churches in 7 cities in the province of Asia. These are not separate letters, but 7 perspectives that complement and reinforce each other in a single book. We already knew Ephesus and Laodicea, but Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, and Philadelphia are new to us. This is evidence of the rapid growth of Jesus' followers in this region. There must be several thousand by now. John calls himself their brother and partner in their suffering because of, quote, the word of God and the testimony of Jesus, unquote. He sees that people are being killed for that testimony. He himself has been banished to the island of Patmos. He writes to encourage them. It won't be long now. The Lord is coming. The trauma of Nero. The book of Revelation, like Luke's two-part work, the Gospel and Acts, was written after the war, can be seen in several places. Just as Luke emphasized the requirements for non-Jewish followers to live in a community with kosher Jewish followers, John acts against leaders in the seven churches who disagree with this. He wants them to take action against sexual immorality and the eating of sacrificial meat. Further on, we see that John also knows that the Lord did not return when the temple was destroyed. Just as Luke adapted the prophecy with the words, quote, Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, unquote, in chapter 21, verse 24, so we read in Revelation 11, verse 2, quote, the Gentiles will trample on the holy city for 42 months, unquote. A symbolic number, as we shall see. Revelation was therefore written after Nero's death. Nevertheless, rumors circulated that the young Nero had not really committed suicide, or even that he had come back to life and would rise again as ruler of the world. Immediately after Nero's fall, there was already someone who claimed to be Nero. Then a second from the province of Asia under Emperor Titus, and a third under Emperor Domitian. They gained followers and support from foreign powers. The line of 2 Thessalonians is continued in Revelation 13. Nero is the beast, the Antichrist, the fallen angel, the son of perdition, the meaning of the Greek name Apollyon and the Hebrew name Abaddon in chapter 9, verse 11. His name is given as a number, 666. That is the numerical value of the letters of the name Emperor Nero in Greek. It is 616 in Latin, and both numbers are found in the surviving manuscripts of Revelation. The writer and the first readers of Revelation remember Nero as the one who persecuted the martyrs, who testified of Jesus and sent his legions to Jerusalem. They also remember how they saw in him a new Caligula, who wanted to place his idol in the temple. John now foresees that the image of the beast must be worshipped, and that anyone who refused to do so will have their life made impossible by the Roman state power. The question is, of course, how the writer means this reference. Does he think that Nero will actually return from the dead? Or does he fear that the young Emperor Domitian or a successor will turn out to be a Nero? With a number, you can puzzle and keep finding new candidates for the role of the beast. The persecution under Domitian, emperor from 81 to 96, who was assassinated at the age of 44. John has had enough of Rome and the emperors, who are worshipped as gods around Ephesus. He has heard of the persecutions in Rome and the deaths of Peter and Paul. He has seen the massive destruction and enormous bloodshed in Israel under Vespasian and Titus. And now he sees and foresees further persecutions in Asia. As a Jew, John suffers from the horrors of war and the loss of the temple. He mourns the victims, feels solidarity with the slaves and forced laborers, and is angry about the ongoing humiliations. The temple tax of the past must now be paid to the Romans, and Emperor Domitian strictly enforces that every Jew, whether born or converted, must contribute. The historian Suetonius writes, quote, taxes on Jews were collected with the utmost severity. People who secretly led a Jewish life, who tried to hide their Jewish origins, and had not paid the tax on their fellow countrymen, were persecuted. I remember from my childhood that I was present when a man of about 90 years of age was examined by the procurator under the greatest scrutiny to see if he was circumcised. End of quotation. People who convert to Judaism or who follow Jesus as non-Jews can be persecuted as, quote, atheists, unquote, because they do not offer sacrifice to the gods or to the emperor. They can lose their possessions, be banished, or be killed unless they are willing to offer sacrifice to the gods again, and in the case of Christians, curse Jesus. John suffers with them as their brother, but he also suffers for those who are afraid and lose their trust in Jesus or who try to hide their faith by eating sacrificial meat from the pagan temples. Many synagogues are not happy with the followers of Jesus. Their missionary zeal does not make the position of Jews as a persecuted minority any easier. The leaders of the synagogues are allowed, within their own community, to punish Jewish followers of Jesus with flogging, as Paul had been flogged many times, receiving 39 lashes. They can also report them to the city authorities as troublemakers. John therefore calls the Jewish communities of Smyrna and Philadelphia, quote, synagogues of Satan, unquote. As a quote-unquote Christian, a quote-unquote atheist, or a troublemaking Jew, John has been banished to the island of Patmos. He is angry with Rome and undoubtedly belongs to those who pour out their complaints to God and pray for justice and revenge. He would rejoice if the plagues of Egypt were poured out on the pagans, or if God were to overturn Rome with fire from heaven, as he once did Sodom and Gomorrah. Stars and Scriptures. Astrology was a science in Rome. Decisions about life and death, war and peace, love and business investments were made based on horoscopes and the position of the stars. People who were convinced that the cosmos influenced the earth. This includes both the fixed patterns of seasons, months, and tides, as well as the disturbances caused by the movements of planets and comets. The constellations represented areas on Earth, and the planets represented dominant forces, such as power, Jupiter, war, Mars, and love, Venus. Their dynamics do not determine everything you do, but you will get ahead better with the wind at your back. The sparkle of humanity comes from the stars, and the outstanding souls of philosophers and emperors will ascend to join the stars. Amidst the gods, the deified emperors continue to exert their influence on earthly life, even after their death. But for Jews and followers of Jesus, Jewish and non-Jewish, the stars do not have the final say. There is a God who created heaven and earth. He holds our stars in his hand, and through a spirit, he reveals himself to people. That spirit gives words. Those words are written down, and those writings can be read again and again. And the reader can also be inspired by the spirit. Yet, heaven is not a paradise, but a battlefield. In the stars, John sees order and chaos, evil and good powers, beauty and horror. There, too, is disobedience to God. But then he sees, as Jesus in Luke 10, verse 18, Satan being thrown out of heaven. His star can no longer control the future. Just as in 1 Peter 5, verse 8, where the devil goes about like a roaring lion because his time is short. The oppression of today is a sign of the bankruptcy of the evil powers. John's visions are not hallucinations out of thin air. Every expression, every image, every symbol in Revelation is connected to similar expressions in other writings, not only from the New Testament, but especially from the Hebrew Bible. Think of the creation in the book of Genesis, and the plagues of Egypt in Exodus, the poetry of the Psalms, the beastly kingdoms in Daniel, the final war in the New Temple in Isaiah and Ezekiel, the exile of, quote, 70 weeks, unquote, that turned out to be 70 years in Jeremiah, and the heavenly visions of Zechariah. The writer, and many in his audience, knew these texts by heart, while others at least recognized their sound. And that is enough. After all, the writer does not quote his predecessors, he does not present us with a riddle to solve. No, it seems more as if the old expectations have fallen to pieces, and John is left with the shards, until the Spirit teaches him to look again, and a new mosaic becomes visible, with a new piece of the puzzle that changes everything. The image of the Lamb that was slain and yet lives. With that, the puzzle is put together again, and new layers of meaning emerge. Dashed expectations now burst like butterflies from their worn cocoons. Prophecies and patterns. Our brain is not only built to perceive unique and incomparable individuals, but also to recognize patterns within them. The pattern of a horse or cow, the pattern of a journey or growth, the pattern of reconciliation or conflict. Stories, symbols, and comparisons work in the same way. The pattern of the body helps us to understand society, and the pattern of the hero helps to experience a Disney film. John sees patterns in the stars, in the scriptures, and in history. The past is prologue, as the English say. patterns repeat themselves. In Daniel, John read that the Anointed One would be killed and that the city would be destroyed. He read that the covenant would be heavy, lasting a week, and that halfway through the week the sacrifice to God would cease. Quote, "For 42 months the Gentiles will trample on the holy city," unquote, writes John. That is an important period of time for him. 1,260 days, 3.5 years, time and double time and half time. Think of 3.5 days, half a week. Perhaps John saw that there were about 35 years between the crucifixion and the destruction of the temple. Perhaps he hoped that 35 years after the fall of Jerusalem, Rome would also be destroyed and the Lord would return. Perhaps. It is important to note that most of the prophecies of the Hebrew Bible did not come true in the time of the prophet or in the manner described. We read how Jonah was to prophesy against the city of Nineveh, which oppressed the nations in his day. 40 days more, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. But the king and the people of Nineveh repented, and the judgment was stayed, much to the prophet's anger. Quote, "I knew that you are gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love," unquote, he laments. Isaiah promised King Ahaz that God would name the child of his pregnant young wife Emmanuel, or God with us. And in his dreams he sees how people call him Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. But our little son Hezekiah could not bear those words, even though he was a good king. Isaiah's far-reaching words are still prophetic when Mary gives birth to Jesus. Our narrators and translators knew that. In fact, doesn't the author's adaptation of biblical prophecy say something about his understanding of the phenomenon of prophecy? That does not mean that he or she did not consider these prophets inspired, or that they did not see the right patterns. Sin leads to judgment, apostasy to exile, and oppression to revenge. But there are also other patterns that can bring about change. Conversion leads to change. God creates a new beginning. There's always a new concrete context in which these patterns can be recognized. And there's the idea that God reveals himself further in history. In that sense, it is quite natural that people in later times search again for the patterns that herald the end of time. Climate change, racial strife, nuclear weapons, meteorites, global viruses, technological revolutions. Some people pick up the book of Revelation again and see that it is upon us. And that is true. We are now more aware than ever that the earth is fragile and finite. But don't let that drive you crazy. There are also patterns of faith, hope, and love that show us the way to a new heaven and a new earth. The Lamb that opens the patterns. For those who are in the midst of suffering, for those who are up to their lips in turbulent waters, it can be a comfort to see the Anointed One in heaven with the bloodied sword of vengeance in his hand. But that image can be shocking to those who want to escape violence, to those who found in Jesus a source of love, without judgment and without punishment. Listen then to the layer beneath. Revenge tastes sweet, but it gives you stomachache, John teaches us. The fighting Anointed One defeats the demons, but not as we expect. There's another pattern that is even stronger, even more transformative. The Lamb that was slain is worthy to break the seals of prophecy. Every time John sees the Lamb, the light breaks through. The repeating patterns of God and humans, of heaven and earth, of Jews and Gentiles are transformed from within in the life of Jesus. In his humiliation lies our glory. In his death, our new life. With his conscious acceptance of suffering, the Lamb has defeated death and won the battle in heaven. Satan, the heavenly accuser, and his angels have been cast out of heaven, so that the outcome of the battle on earth is certain. Our image of God as the one who judges us has been shattered. The Lamb reigns. In the Lamb, 144,000 people from the tribes of Israel are saved. 12 times 12 times 1,000. Everything multiplied by many. All of Israel. And then a multitude from all nations that no one can count. In him, John sees a new heaven and a new earth, a new Jerusalem, the bride of the Lamb, and that Lamb bears the names of God. It is one with God. There's no longer any need for a temple to offer sacrifice to God, because God has given himself to us. Pay attention to the Lamb. Summary: Visions in the Night, around the year 90. Many Jewish refugees also arrive in the densely populated region around Ephesus, causing the communities there to grow rapidly. However, these migrants bring their war traumas with them. They fear the worst when Emperor Domitian, a son of Vespasian, imposed a special tax on the defeated Jews with an iron fist. Non-Jews who adopt a Jewish way of life, such as the followers of Jesus, also face hardship in some provinces. The Revelation of John is a written vision intended to encourage the churches in and around Ephesus. The author is a Jew, John, who has been exiled to an island because of his testimony that Jesus is the coming Lord. In his view, the ancient prophecies of the Hebrew Bible are given a new interpretation in a clash between God's Messiah and Roman imperialism. It is a violent but hopeful message. In heaven, that battle has already been fought, and there the New Jerusalem is being prepared as the bride of the Messiah. Her bridegroom is the Lamb, the Messiah who gave his own life for the new covenant between God and man. The second coming will only be greater. Rome will be defeated, death will be conquered, and heaven and earth will be renewed. There will be no need for a temple of stone, for God or the Lamb himself has become the temple for mankind. A bit of background information. Did Domitian persecute Christians? We have little evidence for the traditional belief that Domitian persecuted the followers of Jesus throughout the empire, and specifically as Christians. We do know that he imposed taxes on Jews, and that he had his nephew Clement executed, and his wife Domitilla exiled for their, quote, atheism, unquote, the refusal to worship the gods. This was an accusation against, quote, many who drifted towards Judaism, unquote, whether or not they were followers of Jesus. Only ethnic Jews were exempt from the obligation to worship the gods. As in the case of Nero, there are doubts, but beware, you cannot acquit them both. There is clear evidence, see below the letter from Governor Pliny to Emperor Trajan, that a law was enacted against, quote, Christians, unquote, carrying the death penalty. That must have been done by Nero or Domitian. If Domitian had done so, there would have been persecution in all provinces, and we see no evidence of that. But if the law dates back to Nero's time, a local governor in the 90s could have chosen to actively enforce it. How this happened is described in the letters of Pliny the Younger, who became governor of Bithynia, the province north of Asia, around the year 112. He was confronted with a lawsuit against people accused of being, quote, Christians, unquote. Pliny is not familiar with the old law and is, quote unquote, reluctant. He has some stubborn Christians executed, 2 deaconesses tortured, and then asked the emperor for help, because there are so many Christians that the pagan temples are selling less and less sacrificial meat. The emperor is not really interested either, but anyone who is proven to be a Christian and refused to sacrifice to the gods must, of course, be put to death. If torture and executions were normal under a quote-unquote reluctant governor and emperor, what must it have been like in Asia under a less reluctant governor, and a Domitian who was hunting down Jews? Pliny to Emperor Trajan. It is my constant practice, Lord, to submit all matters about which I am uncertain to you, for who can better guide me in my hesitation and instruct me in my ignorance? I have not previously been involved in the persecution of Christians, and therefore do not know what punishments and interrogations are meted out and how harshly. I have long pondered the question of whether a distinction should be made based on age or physical condition. Is there room for mercy for those who repent and have stopped? And is the name Christian alone punishable, without further misdeeds? Or is the misdeeds committed under that name? For the time being, when people were brought before me as Christians, I proceeded as follows. I asked them if they were Christians. Those who confessed, I asked a second and a third time, under threat of the death penalty. Those who persisted I had taken away, for I have no doubt that, whatever one believes, such obstinate and inflexible stubbornness deserves to be punished. There were also some, equally insane, whom I could not execute because they were Roman citizens. I sent them to Rome with the charges against them. Soon after my treatment of this crime became known, many more cases arose, as often happens. An anonymous pamphlet was received with many names in it. Those who denied being Christians or ever having been Christians, who invoked the Roman gods with the correct wording, who offered incense and wine before your image, which I had brought here for this purpose, and cursed Christ, which true Christians could not possibly be made to do, I acquitted and released. Others who were named in the report admitted that they were Christians, but quickly renounced their faith. Some had already done so, one 3 years ago, another many years ago, several even 20 years ago, when Domitian was emperor. Note, they too had all venerated the images of you and the gods and cursed Christ. However, they claimed that their guilt or fault was no more than the custom of gathering on a fixed day of the week before daylight and singing a song to Christ as a god and binding themselves to each other with a vow. That was not to commit crimes. On the contrary, no theft or robbery, no adultery, no false testimony, no holding on to property entrusted to another. After this, they dispersed to gather again later that day for a normal and innocent meal. They had ceased doing this after my edict, which, in accordance with your command, prohibits gatherings of all kinds. I therefore considered it all the more necessary to have 2 female slaves, known as deaconesses, tortured in order to discover the truth. But I found nothing but degenerate and unbridled superstition. I have therefore suspended the investigation and hastened to consult you. The matter seems to me worthy of your consideration, given the large number of people affected. For many people of all ages, all classes and both sexes have been and are being endangered. And not only in the cities, this contamination is also widespread in villages and fields. But it seems to be remedied and rectified. It is already clear that almost deserted temples are beginning to be visited again. The religious ceremonies are taking place again after a long interruption. Everywhere there is sacrificial meat again, for which until recently there were few buyers. From this, it is easy to deduce how large the crowd is that can be corrected if there is room for repentance. Response by Trajan to Pliny the Younger. You have done what you had to do, dear Secundus, in dealing with reports against Christians. After all, there is no general, clearly defined procedure for resolving this. You should not actively persecute them, only if there are reports and evidence against them should they be punished, with the proviso that anyone who denies still being a Christian and proves it by invoking our gods shall be pardoned, however suspicious their past may be. Anonymous pamphlets have no place in criminal cases. They set very bad precedents and do not fit in with my array.